shadow move ominously across the land, dyeing the sky with blood and pounding the earth. Those who still have faith in justice and honor, valor and goodness call out his name. The ultimate superhero, the only one who can save the world from extinction. If he can't do it, no one can.
Oh, me?
Whoa, baby! That's my boy! If he can't do it, no one can! Man, I can't believe it's been 19 years since Clover Studios' Red Hot Hero debuted onto the silver screen. Since his last adventure on the silver screen in 05, he's been in a fighting game, another fighting game, a skin in a fighting game, and a whole other slew of random guest appearances. Even if you haven't played his games, you've probably at least seen Viewtiful Joe. Maybe you're like me, and your first exposure to Viewtiful Joe was with the anime when it first aired in the States. Which, by the way, isn't available to legally watch anymore. The only way I've been able to watch the Viewtiful Joe anime in 2022 is with the Spanish dub that this one guy uploaded on YouTube. So, shout out to this guy, who's the only one keeping Viewtiful Joe's legacy still alive. It wasn't until my family rented me Viewtiful Joe on the GameCube that I got my first taste of character action games. Viewtiful Joe would then go on to shape my love for character action games and put me onto that subgenre. It sucks that Capcom has retired one of their A-listers, because I think Viewtiful Joe is far from washed up. On replay, I found that this game had a ton of heart, style, and depth that was far ahead of its time. It's one of the building blocks for stylish action games as a whole, and I think it would be fun to highlight what makes Viewtiful Joe an all-time classic. So let's respond to our heroic instincts deep inside and say the word Henshin!
Henshin a go-go, baby! Want some? We'll come and get it.
The curtain draws on Joe and Silvia out on a movie date. The two are watching a Captain Blue movie, much to Silvia's chagrin. Joe's always been the fan of Captain Blue action movies, and Silvia's much more interested in behind-the-scenes kind of action. I don't think the two were expecting this next twist in the movie, though. Blue gets defeated, and the bad guys reach out of the screen to kidnap Silvia. Well, the 3D for this goes kinda crazy. The villains then go back into the screen, taking Silvia with them. Joe's maidenless now, but at least he's got a sick robot. It's now up to Joe to go back into movie land and stop the guys who kidnapped his girlfriend. Although, honestly, Joe's not very peeved about her disappearance. He kinda just forgets she's there. She's all like,
"Oh, Joe, I hope you come save me soon." And Joe's like, "I can double jump now, sick."
He's actually much more jazzed about that, really. That power coming from his new V-Watch, granted to him by Captain Blue himself. This fancy new timepiece lets Joe use VFX powers that manipulate the movie that he's starring in. Armed with his new powers, Joe sets out to stop the mysterious Jado organization that kidnapped Silvia, and Silvia just happens to be the key to all their plans. At its heart, Viewtiful Joe is about Joe's own personal journey to becoming a hero like Captain Blue. Blue is there to teach Joe the ins and outs of the V-Watch, but once his mentor has taught him everything, the rest is up to Joe. Joe learns to master his abilities on the fly and become a hero the only way he knows how, with his own style and his own flair. In fact, Joe doesn't even adopt his signature name until nearly the end of the game. He spends most of it trying to figure it out, and it finally hits him after he defeats his rival, Alastor, who I might add, is equally cool and stylish. Although, I can't shake the feeling that I've heard that name before. Anyway, thematically, this moment is super rad. Joe's overcome a bunch of foes up until this point, including the one who scarred Captain Blue. It isn't until he conquers himself literally and figuratively that he gains his iconic name.
Beautiful. Well, yeah, that works. I'm Joe. Viewtiful Joe.
What follows after this Alastor encounter is a boss rush against the very foes that stood against his path. This should be a walk in the park because you are Viewtiful Joe, and the narrative ties into the gameplay seamlessly, as the game expects you to play the part of a stylish action hero. And boy, playing the part of a beautiful hero is not easy. This is because Viewtiful Joe is tough as nails. You can expect to die a lot on every difficulty, even on the game's easy mode setting, which is called Kids. I played the game on adults, which is normal for this review, and it was some of the toughest shit that I've ever played. I was looking like the mid-blunder boy by the end of my playthrough. But to talk about why Viewtiful Joe is so difficult, it's important to understand the anatomy of a character action game first. Character action is an action game subgenre with key characteristics that separate them from other action games. They usually focus on a super powered, super stylish main character and how they use their abilities to interact with the world around them. There's usually a rival character who's similar in ability to the protagonist and acts as a foil. They can be a human or have the same kind of abilities that the protagonist has. These games are usually short, but highly replayable, with a lot of bonus content unlocking after your first playthrough and even beyond that. Shoot 'em up style levels are common too. Space may be a place that you visit at some point as well. But most importantly, character action games are laser focused on their gameplay, meaning they have a lot of mechanical depth. The protagonist has a highly specific set of tools that they can use to tackle combat encounters, and will be pit against hordes of enemies to test their abilities. Sometimes there's a gimmick that's the crux of the combat too, like with Bayonetta's Witch Time. The protagonist's kit expands over the duration of the title, usually with new moves or even weapons that shape how you approach encounters, and sometimes you can get these abilities through an item shop. Big, bombastic, over-the-top moves with long combo trees are pretty common in these games. There's a heavy emphasis on style in combat, which I think is the most important thing in separating a character action game from the rest of the pack. I can't just call Legend of the Guardians a character action game just because it has a style meter and a rival character. Can I? Many character action games will even rate your performance either on the fly with said style meter or after combat. To do well in a character action game is to kick serious ass and look good doing it, meaning you have to master its systems in order to gain the upper hand. This means that with most character action titles, there's a learning curve associated. The steepness of that curve varies from game to game, but many of the games that came out around the time that Viewtiful Joe did tend to be a little bit more difficult, but more on that later.
Time to go to work, guys.
So now that we've went down this character action checklist, we can kind of understand how Viewtiful Joe works. So let's explore Viewtiful Joe a little more mechanically. Joe's got punches and kicks to deal out justice like any good action hero. He's also got slick dodges to effortlessly evade enemy attacks with style. But the real oomph in that moveset comes from the VFX powers that Joe can use, and you can see just how much juice he can use up on that blue gauge up there. It goes up the more you collect the V-reels, and you're going to want to make sure you get all of these in the levels. And all of Joe's abilities are really freaking cool. Joe can use VFX Slow to bring the flow of time to a grinding halt. Slow increases the stopping power of his attacks, or even the characteristics in some cases. It's pretty useful for getting a grasp of the situation on screen because everything in frame is kind of slowed down. Things like missiles or bullets are even easier to hit because you can see their after images right after they're fired. And speaking of firing bullets, enemies that you stagger during slow can be launched into other enemies or objects for big damage. The manual calls this the target rock on. Anyway, Mach Speed does the opposite of slow, as the name suggests. It accelerates everything on the screen to, well, Mach speeds. Joe clones himself and has after images, flying every fucking corner of the screen while he's punching away at his enemies, and he also ignites on fire, which is really freaking cool. The last ability in Joe's little toolkit is Vfx Zoom, which brings the frame closer to Joe. And during this close-up period, weaker enemies will be stunned and all of my boy flexing. Joe has access to a pinwheel kick, an anti-air cyclone, and also a dive bomb. I think Zoom has the most potential out of the three because you can use slow or Mach speed together with it. This does come at the cost of your VFX gauge going down twice as fast, but it is the most potent. Specifically, I do think that slow and zoom are kind of overpowered. All of Joe's damage output goes up super high when both of these are used together, and Joe's punch combo, while slow zoom, becomes the most destructive combo in the entire game, the Red Hot 100, which I actually didn't know was a move you could use in this game until my playthrough for this video. I have played this game like 5 or 6 times throughout my entire adult life and I didn't know about it. You also do have a VFX dodge to mitigate damage if you want to cash in your meter for that, but it does eat a lot of your gauge, and once that gauge depletes, you'll be back to your normal civilian human form. You're at a big disadvantage here because you can't rely on your powers when stuck in this form. VFX powers are your saving grace in combat, but they can also be used to solve puzzles in all of the levels. Slow has the power to amplify, so it can make things like water droplets or lightning arcs bigger. It can also bring down platforms because it slows down the propellers on the bottom. And inversely, speed does the opposite. It can raise water levels, it can raise platforms, or the rate at which objects are moving. I find it really cool that your toolkit can be used to navigate the environment and not just to bring down the hammer of justice. With all of these mechanics in mind, Viewtiful Joe's difficulty starts to make a bit more sense. The game continues to present new scenarios and challenges to the player with every level. This can be with its level design or with an enemy that brings a new attack pattern to the table. These two things either work together or separately to create Viewtiful Joe's challenge. These challenges then build on the player's understanding of the game and frequently present the player with tough situations to overcome, but the answer to everything is within the player's established toolbox. So while new enemies and bosses may seem overwhelming or hard to deal with at first, you should be able to
just go for it!
Every enemy in this game has a clear weakness to exploit, and also telegraph all their moves with animations or sound cues. Understanding all these things little by little is how you get better at Viewtiful Joe. But this understanding comes with a lot of trial and error. You will suck at first, but no hero worth their salt is born overnight. Getting your ass beat just builds character is all.
Cut! Ready? Action!
You will see yourself getting better at the game as you understand what it asks of you. In that sense, the player's relationship with the game is like a director and actor. Playing your part and following the script is how you'll succeed, which is fun and interesting because the game itself is framed like a movie. And once you conquer this learning curve, you gain an insane sense of mastery. You feel unstoppable because a lot of the enemies in this game will just instantly fold once you know how to deal with them. The game even throws old bosses at you during its endgame because you should be able to crush them no problem. There's no one solution on how you approach these encounters, and the game encourages you to figure it all out. Again, this goes hand in hand with the game's narrative. Much like Joe, you start off with a newbie with no skill. You're shown all the mechanics, your base moveset, and then you're left to figure it all out on your own. And like Joe, you become a hero as you understand yourself, your abilities, and how to use them. I think it's a masterstroke in weaving gameplay and narrative together. Speaking of masterstrokes though, Viewtiful Joe's mise-en-scène is one of my favorite parts of this game, and it helps cement its unique identity. The character design for this game was done by Suekane Kumiko, who's done work for Resident Evil, Ace Attorney, and even Fire Emblem. All of these designs have really fun and striking quirks that borrow from tokusatsu influences to make them a lot more memorable. I don't think there's a single miss here, honestly, but to be fair, that's because I'm a big honkin' scarf enjoyer. We should put more big scarves on characters. The game is also heavily influenced by cinema classics, and it wears that on its sleeve. These are references that vaguely frame each level in most cases. Some are a little subtle, and some are a bit on the nose. Like, is this allowed? Is that allowed? As a film student, I found it cool that Viewtiful Joe referenced all the classics that I watched and studied in my lectures, even if I did fall asleep for most of them. And hey, Viewtiful Joe itself is framed to be a movie. Joe is the star, and all of his powers are modeled after film techniques used to enhance the experience for the viewer. And the better he does in combat, the more the audience cheers for him. Cameras click as Joe weaves through attacks and as he lands blows. He flexes, he poses, and he moves with style. You get the feeling that Joe is having the time of his life, because my dude is hootin' and hollerin' while he eats up that camera. I'm also fond of the way the game's graphic design and UI reminds me of American comics. The font choices especially have that bombastic comic book feel. This ties back to the characters, which feel like they leapt out of a comic book too. All of the major characters have regular everyday wear, and superhero alter egos to fight against evil. This is probably why I gravitated towards Viewtiful Joe a lot as a kid, because you definitely get Peter Parker and Spider-Man vibes from him. But I think Viewtiful Joe's soundtrack is the most important aspect of its identity. Like any good movie soundtrack, it often uses leitmotifs as a vehicle to guide the narrative. Wow, I can't believe I'm getting the opportunity to be pretentious with my film focus and my English degree today. Joe the Hero is Joe's theme song, and it's explicitly linked to his identity. You hear it and you instantly think of Joe. But we can also hear echoes of it in other themes in the game too. Captain Blue's theme song, Blue the Justice, has a tempo and instrumentation very similar to Joe's. It actually sounds a lot like that backing track that Joe the Hero has, which fits narratively. Blue is Joe's hero, someone who he looks up to and wants to be exactly like. This song is Blue's theme, and it plays when Joe first fights him, but it also plays when Joe fights mini-bosses. Blue the Justice has this cool, like, multi-layered function of playing when Joe's heroics are being tested, and also foreshadows the finale being used again in the final boss theme, but it builds on it. And speaking of being built on, another Joe has another example of this. That song first plays when you fight Alistair disguised as Joe. Alistair gets his own theme song after this, but another Joe hints at the fact that even out of his disguise, he's similar to Joe in a lot of ways, especially in his design. And lastly, my favorite example of clever storytelling through music comes from the song that plays whenever you've encountered a boss from Jado. The song is called Boss Encounter, and it serves as an introduction to the character before their individual themes play. It's a neat song that sets the stage for every boss battle.
Yo, man, what's up? What can I do for you, kiddo?
But the sickest shit happens in the final level of the game. The song that plays during this last level is called Joe and Silvia. It's not just a leitmotif, but it's also an evolution of the boss encounter theme. Joe and Silvia begins the exact same way as the theme it borrows from, and then it speeds up and evolves, becoming its own song. This is extremely powerful from a narrative standpoint. The stage is set for the grand finale here, and the game throws its toughest challenges at you here. But like the gameplay and the story have suggested to you this whole time, everything that lies ahead of you can be conquered. The music is just reinforcing this. Every element of Viewtiful Joe's design feels like it's made in such a cohesive and amazing way. From the gameplay to the narrative, these things gel together in such an organic way that it's so hard not to gush about. Early in this video, I talked a lot about what made a character action game tick. Eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed that almost all my examples were titles that were developed by Platinum Games. I do believe that Platinum has pushed the envelope for stylish and tight gameplay since they've been established, and I think the list of the games they've developed speak for themselves. But what does Viewtiful Joe have to do with all of this? Plenty, actually. Viewtiful Joe was developed by Team Viewtiful, who went on to become Clover Studio. The studio wasn't open for very long, only producing a handful of games before they unfortunately shut their doors. Despite that though, I do think Clover's games are some of the most influential and beloved titles to grace the consoles they were on, even if Godhand lost out to Imagine Party Babies. Once Clover Studio closed, however, key staff went on to form Platinum Games, including the director and producer of Viewtiful Joe, Hideki Kamiya and Atsushi Inaba, respectively. Platinum has gone on to create some of the most influential and beloved action games, period. Bayonetta, Revengeance, and Nier Automata are still highly regarded today, still being talked about years after they've come out. Those games, again, do borrow from the building blocks that Viewtiful Joe helped establish. I'm not saying that Joe invented the wheel, but I know a red hot kick when I see one. Viewtiful Joe was crucial in helping cement the style and tight gameplay that Platinum Games is now known for, and there is a through line we can follow, namely through the games that Kamiya has directed and the titles that Inaba has produced. Kamiya himself has a pretty nutty resume. Before Viewtiful Joe, he directed a little indie game called Devil May Cry, featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series. This game featured a cool, cocky devil hunter who'd explored a big-ass gothic mansion and stylishly fought legions of demons. DMC had that early 2000s edge that still kicks ass today. Many of DMC's gameplay quirks and designs can be seen in Viewtiful Joe. Difficult and exciting combat that rewards players based on their skill. The same can be said for the Devil May Cry games that came after Viewtiful Joe, even if Kamiya wasn't exactly involved in them. This game was actually the only one in the series that Kamiya directed and wrote for, but Devil May Cry remains a core pillar for character action games today. Speaking of Devil May Cry though, Dante and Trish would actually guest star in Viewtiful Joe's PS2 port. Dante keeps the spirit of his moveset from Devil May Cry 1, bringing his trademark pistols Ebony and Ivory, and his sword.
Wait, that's him! It's Alistair! There it is!
Alistair himself is a big nod to the Devil May Cry series, being the spirit that resides in Dante's sword. And Alistair also borrows Dante's moveset very, very liberally in his boss fight, and this is true in every port of the game. Dante's inclusion in Viewtiful Joe is important, because his moveset in this game was the inspiration for Bayonetta's moveset. This punching motion that Dante does before firing his pistols was the key, and you can see that very clearly in Bayonetta. Echoes of Viewtiful Joe can be seen in Bayonetta as well, which makes a lot of sense because Kamiya directed this game too. Bayonetta sees a witch revived in modern times, ready to kick angel ass and look amazing while doing it. The game adopts a film aesthetic for its cutscenes, and they do remind me of Viewtiful Joe's. Bayonetta does wink and nod at Joe in little ways, like with this red hot slugger tombstone. Some references are a little more obvious, like the clip I played earlier. Bayonetta builds on the foundation laid out by both Viewtiful Joe and Devil May Cry. She borrows Joe's style and bombast, emphasizing how good the player looks in combat, becoming untouchable once its systems are mastered. Bayo takes from Devil May Cry's mechanical depth, especially with just how many functions you can get from a single button press. Again, I think Joe's influence here is hard to ignore, but I think the Platinum game that has the most of Viewtiful Joe's spirit is the Wonderful 101. Hideki Kamiya and Itsushi Inaba both worked on this game, and it shows. The Wonderful 101 is a love letter to Platinum's history as a whole, so it makes sense that it borrows from everything that came before it. You play as a hero clad in red who wears a pink scarf and punches big hard. It's an action game focused on stylish combat with a huge learning curve to overcome. You manage a meter to perform special moves and have to maintain it in order to stand a fighting chance. This sounds familiar, doesn't it? Silvia is also, actually in this game. Maybe under a different alias, but her name is Silvia, I'm pretty sure. I think part of the reason why I doo-dooed myself when I first played the Wonderful 101 was because it reminded me of Viewtiful Joe, and it's hard not to see why. Viewtiful Joe's producer, Atsushi Inaba, is no slouch either. He's produced many of Clover and Platinum's most beloved titles, being involved in such games like Okami, Mad World, Vanquish, Revengeance, and Nier Automata. Many of these games are critically praised for many of their aspects, but especially for the tight, engaging combat. The main thing that they have in common is that they all borrow from the character action guidebook that Joe helped write. Honestly, I went through my entire mental checklist when writing that character action bit earlier, just looking at all the things that was in Viewtiful Joe, and then I looked at all the other character action games that I've played, and I was like, yeah, that counts. Platinum games build on everything they've learned in each title they've released, so it's very hard to deny that their earliest titles helped shape their identity today. I just think my little red hot guy deserves some more credit is all. I had a script written out for this outro, but like my last video, fuck it, just tossing it out. We're gonna just go for it. Viewtiful Joe is my favorite character action game, right up there with Bayonetta, and I do think it's one of character action's founding fathers. It hurts to see that it is so forgotten and not as celebrated as it should be. It's very important to me, and I think it's part of why I love this hobby so much, just playing video games and enjoying them and enjoying all of these big challenges to overcome with my skill. I'm not great at action games, but it does make me feel good when I overcome this learning curve and become what the game wants me to. I think it's also really important to Clover and Platinum specifically and their storied history because they've still produced a lot of the most important action games that have come out within the last decade. I think Viewtiful Joe is a masterclass in game design, designed very tightly around the player's kit, their understanding of the game, and also the levels. It gives you everything you need in order to succeed, and then it just kind of throws you out into the deep end. I recommend it to pretty much everyone who wants to try out a really fun and interesting action game. Maybe you might want to play that first time on kids difficulty because adults is pretty rough. It does expect a lot out of you, but again, it never puts you in a situation that's very out of your control. You just kind of have to simmer down and take the game at your own pace. And physical copies of this game aren't super expensive to seek out, so if you want to play it in its quote-unquote purest form, I would really recommend that. It's a game that, unfortunately, the sands of time have forgotten, and I will yell from my soapbox all the time when it comes to character action games that still need to be celebrated today. And with that, that'll be it for the video. If you made it this far, I'm very grateful for your time and your patience. Honestly, it's a long one, I'm pretty sure. The thumbnail art for this video was drawn by Setsulko. Himawari in this variant is donning Viewtiful Joe's signature red suit complete with the big honkin' scarf I enjoyed. I think all of the colors and the rendering for this are really, really cute. So drop a follow. Her socials are up on the didgeridoo above, and I'm very grateful for this piece. Thank you, Setsuko. And again, if you do enjoy what I do, feel free to like the video, drop a sub, comment, subscribe, YouTube engagement stuff. I do like doing this whenever I get the chance, and seeing people enjoy it is what keeps me going. But with that being said, take care, you guys. I'll see you next time. Stay gold.